I didn't know you could do that. If I'd known you could do that, I might have done that as well.
Well, they
So
so,
straws up in the teeth.
well,
I
it was
wouldn't
just
think that's very good.
it was just wheat or barley straws,
Oh.
Did you turn it on?
and you cut them with a knife so they were smooth,
For doing that.
and then just twist them up like this up into there, and the milk could just run up.
Any blood or anything,
And Dad would say, that cow's gonna get catch cold up in her bag there with that opening. Like that air will be going back up in there. And he had, and so don't ever do it again. Well, we never got caught at it again. We still did it, but we never got caught at it again.
I have a vague memory of you talking about some kind of a story. I don't remember any details other than the picture in my mind is you stored something under your house and had to go in there and get something or...
Oh, we dug a basement under there. Had to fill it back up again.
The house?
When did he grow up in or?
Yeah.
On 24th place had a basement.
Yeah, that basement.
No, there was something have to go under the porch or under the house or...
I don't remember
You
anything.
had food storage.
Stored under the house.
And you dug that cellar on
They're in the downtown chapel.
Well, we had a nice cellar there.
There's some
But
stories.
Mother and Dad wanted a cellar under the house out on the farm there. And the house was up on the block, so I proceeded to, they commissioned me to dig that thing. So I started digging in the back and behind the house there. And when I got down far enough, then I got me one of these scoops, looked like a wheelbarrow, but farmers use it to move dirt. Just doesn't have a wheel on the front. But it has handles on the back like a wheelbarrow and shaped like a wheelbarrow, except on the front it's a scoop. I forgot what they call them now. The buck scrapers are the big ones. 2 horses pull those, but can't remember what that little one's called.
Fresno.
No. Fresno's also a dirt mover, but it's a bigger one. But anyway, I was digging that thing, and as I got farther down and working back under the house then, I had the mule, and we had one mule, and I had her hooked up to it. And so we'd shovel dirt down under, digging the thing back, fill that up, and then the mule would pull it up out of the hole and slide it up the ramp. And we'd take it over and dump it wherever Dad had told us to dump it. Well, we had that thing just about all done, ready for him to go in there now and line it or do what he was going to do. And a gopher dug a hole down into there, not knowing, I'm sure it didn't know what was down there, but digging a hole, and it broke through the wall. We didn't know that, and the next time we irrigated, that cellar just filled up completely with water. Just filled it up. And boy, were we scared because we were afraid the house was going to fall in there now because there wasn't any, that soil was all soaked up so much it just cave off and that part of the house would just fall. Now it wouldn't fall in the hole, but it'd fall down to the ground. And so we had to refill it. Remember, and I taught you guys that song when you were little kids. From Davy Crockett's.
High dug out the cellar, had to refill.
Up every morning, milk the cows, water the chickens, and slop the sows. Russell, Russell Harris, scourge of the Lehigh Hill.
I didn't know
You
what
made that up
I
on
didn't
one
know
of
what
our
a scourge was. When I learned that song.
Yeah, you were too
I
little
didn't
to
know
know
what
what
that word
scourge was. But anyway, that had to fill that thing all back up again. And Dad had gotten some rocks. Had the Ray boys were hauling these steel or iron balls up to the mills to grind up the ore, and then they were coming back empty. And so he got them to bring some of this sandstone from up there somewhere down and to our place. And so each time they'd go, they'd bring a load of it because he was going to build some more on the house and build it out of these sandstone. Well, we ended up taking all those sandstone and putting them down in that hole to fill up before before the house fell in it. And so that was a lost cause there.
Susan, do you want to request something? Are you guys gonna have to go, or are you gonna stay all night?
No, we're gonna need to go, but I'm sure he'll cover the ones I talked about.
Okay.
Which ones did you like?
Which one did what I told you when I came, what did I tell him?
I can't remember.
How about some viewers hear about Wiggles the dog? I don't know, I mean, you had Wiggles when the kids were old enough to remember Wiggles.
When Kenneth was 8, we got
Okay,
Wiggles.
so they were old enough
Yeah.
We haven't got anywhere near to that. We're still on the farm in Lehigh.
Oh, yeah, you're supposed to talk about when you met Mom.
He was
Oh,
only
we were
3
going-
years old, we got 45 minutes, and he was only 3 years old.
You're supposed to talk about when you met Mom.
Yeah, we don't have any grandma stories yet.
That's all right.
Somewhere in this, I want you to record that story of the lady at the store, had the 2 police officers there.
Lady at the door and that
Everything
police
must
officer.
go.
What?
Is this something we did? or-
At Christmas time when he was at the store and everything must
You,
go.
with you guys, and we bought these warming trays and with the cheese over it?
No,
No,
this is just
this is
recent.
recent.
Oh,
So it's gonna be at the end of the tape because this is chronological, and so.
forgot about that
I
already.
think next on the list is grandma. You started to talk
Yeah.
about meeting grandma.
Well, I can't remember seeing Grandma. I know I had to have seen her because she's taken seminary and the school wasn't that big. But I didn't know her. And I had stopped in the hall one day to talk to Wilma Winterton that I knew, and her brother Boyd was in Tom's class, but a good friend. And so I told him some dumb joke, and Mom was standing there. Mom was standing there with her, but so I saw her, and she might even, Wilma might even introduced her to me, but I didn't think that much about it. And besides, I had 6 or 8 other girlfriends at the time. I mean, they were my girlfriends. I wasn't their boyfriends, but they were my girlfriends. Anyway, that night or soon thereafter, we went to the dance at the Mazzona like we did
We
every
didn't.
every Friday, not
You and
us
I
together,
went, yeah.
no, I went to the Mazzona dances every week, and once in a while I had a date and took the girl there. But most of the time I just went there and danced with whoever was there. Well, not the guys, but, well, so anyway, I got there and I recognized Mom as having been talked to that day in the hall, so I asked her to dance with me, and she did. And we danced several times that evening, and so then I had my dad's car that night. I didn't have my car. Well, I didn't have my car yet. I hadn't bought it yet. I had Dad's big LaSalle. I mean, they don't make LaSalles anymore, but they're like Cadillacs. They're made by General Motors, and really big fancy car. And so we talked to her dad, and he said it was all right if she went home with me. So I took her, and we went and got something to eat and chatted a while. Anyway, got her home.
No,
But the next morning,
No, that was the night we didn't get home till 3 o'clock.
well, but I did that part of the story, the material.
Well, I thought it was funny.
Well, it was weird.
Me
Dad-
out with a strange guy, and I didn't come home till 3 in the morning.
Well, all right, Dad had just overhauled the LaSalle, and Roy had an Oldsmobile just a year younger. The LaSalle was a 36, Roy had a 35 Oldsmobile. And they overhauled them one Saturday at the shop down there at Mesa High. And Frank Gilpin was the shop teacher, and he let them do that, and I was down there to help them with it. Well, anyway, we stopped just to talk for a while, and then the car wouldn't start. And I figured that when you put in new rings and that, a car in those days, certainly when you did that, the engine was tight. It took a while for it to wear in. And in fact, when you bought a new car in those days, you only used this 5-weight oil in them for the first 500 miles while that engine wore in. Well, people who went back to the factory to get their cars, and quite a few people did, they had to drive like 30 miles an hour. They wouldn't let them go. They weren't supposed to go faster than that for the first 100 miles, and then they could go 35. But anyway, so that was, they'd overhauled their cars and put new rings and bearings and all that in it. Well, the car wouldn't start. And so, couldn't figure out what was the matter, and I knew I thought I had plenty of gas in it, but we couldn't get it started. So we walked over to the railroad station, just across the way there a little ways, and called to some of these guys that were my buddies to see if we could get one of them to come and bring their car. Well, they either were asleep and the parents wouldn't wake them, or the parents said, "Why are you calling this time of the night?" But anyway, what had happened there was when they put that car back together after they'd overhauled it, they had cross-threaded the fuel line where it came into the carburetor, cross-threaded it. And even though we put all this gas in the car, it's being pumped out on the ground as fast as you're driving the car. And so just that distance of driving it from town, which he put gas in it, to the farm and back to the dance, and then back to where we stopped there to talk a while, all that gas had pumped out of the car onto the ground. And I'm surprised we didn't smell it, because there's a lot of gas.
You kept trying to start it, we waited a while longer, and he tried to start it again, and no cars were coming by or anything.
So anyway, I just walked her on home then from there. And then I went back to the car, and a policeman pulled up, and I said, "I don't know what's the matter with this thing." I didn't know him personally, I don't know why. I didn't, but anyway, he said, "Well, you sure you have gasoline in it?" And I said, "Well, they put gas in it, yeah." And he said, "Well, let's check." And he got something and put it down in the gas tank and came up dry. There wasn't any gas in it. And that surprised me. So he said, "Well, here, let me take you down to the service station, and we'll get a can of gas and bring it back and put it in there, and then you can take his can back to him and put some more in there." So that's what we did. But the next morning, nobody really said anything to us about staying out. I could have stayed out all night, and my mother or my dad would not have said, "Well, how come you did that?" Or
My folks didn't know what time I got home.
They just didn't do that. They just, "Hey, if you stay out and don't get your sleep, tough luck. You're still going to have to do what has to be done that next day."
That's right.
You'll pay the penalty. I don't need to penalize you. So they never really said anything to us about that. But I told Dad, or maybe Mother said, "God, what time did you get home?" So I told him what had happened, and so Dad went out there, and I'd gone back to the station and put about 3 or 4 more gallons in there. Dad went out there, and the thing's almost empty. And so then he figures out what's happened. That's been cross-threaded. So he takes it back off of there and straightens it. And fortunately, it tightened down tight. And so then we're all right. But that really messed up our night there. So anyway, that Saturday, after we got the car fixed there, Dad had got the thread straight on it, I went down to Merrill's store, and because we didn't have a telephone, it was about a mile down to their grocery store. And it was right on the corner there of McKillop's and Country Club. There's a lubrication place right on that corner now, that southwest corner. But anyway, they had a grocery store and then their home behind it. I went down there and I called her house. I don't know how come I knew your phone number. Maybe I remembered Richard's. So I called up and Dwayne answered the phone. Now Dwayne's only like 8 years old or so. And I said, "Is your sister there?" And he said, "Well, I have 3 sisters. Which one do you want?" And I said, "The one with red hair." And he said, "Well, I have 2 of them with red hair."
The cute one.
And I said, "Well, I want the one that's in high school." "Oh, okay. Well, she's not here. She's over at Wilma, Winterton, over at Wilma's house." And I said, well, okay.
Where's the other one?
And I said, by the way, what's her name? And he said, Irma. And I said, oh, okay. And I recognized it then, that was it. And so, that's always been so funny. Dance with her all evening, take her home and go through all that rigmarole to get her home, and then couldn't even remember her first name.
And he wasn't seen now then.
So then I called Wilma's and talked with her, and she said, well, they didn't seem to be upset that she got home so late. But anyway, then, I don't remember, it took you somewhere on a date shortly after that.
You had Rodney Brudge, ride in shorthand,
Oh, yeah.
inviting me to go to the dance with
Yeah,
you.
okay. Anyway, that's how we started going together.
So he handed me this note. Well, I couldn't read it, so I had to go find somebody that could read shorthand to tell me what it said. Wasn't that clever?
So do we want to include stories about throwing gas caps out in the middle of the islands?
If you'd like to hear it, that was before he met me, so I don't.
That was, no, that wasn't, that was after.
Oh, I want to know about that. I want to know about
Because that was the end of my junior year.
Oh, okay, well, I didn't know you were leaving me.
Well, Sterling McMurran was my seminary teacher. And Sterling McMurran was fairly young guy. He just had a bachelor's degree, but he taught seminary there at Mesa High. And the seminary was kitty-cornered across the street from the high school. And in a building built just for that. Well, Sterling, he really was a pleasant guy. I've always felt bad about all that nonsense because he really was a pleasant guy. His wife sometimes would come and teach the classes. And, or if we had another teacher also, because there were a lot of seminary students there.
Brother Boyd and Brother Bryson and Brother Benton.
So anyway, we got on a kick in the class we had with him, which was the last one of the day. And that was my last seminary class, because you had to take it 3 years in those days. So Jack Wright was in the class, and Jack's dad was the stake president. Kenneth Blake was in the class, and Kenneth's dad and mother were temple workers. Lived right across the street from the temple. Boris Dees was in the class. He later became constable of Mesa and was Mr. Arizona after the war. Mr. Arizona, and a runner-up in the Mr. America contest. He was husky. Anyway, these bunch of guys in there. And so McMurran always said, now, if one person eats in here, we all eat. So if you're going to bring food to this class, you bring enough for everybody. So we got our heads together and we thought, we're gonna teach him a lesson. Now he was the teacher. He's supposed to be teaching us a lesson, but we're gonna teach him a lesson. So what we did was next day at noon we went down to Upton's and we bought a pound of Spanish peanuts. And then we went into Wright's Market and we bought a little plastic bag of chili topinos. And they looked just like Spanish peanuts. About the same size and the color and everything. So now we go to our seminary class and we each one of us take a little bit of handful of peanuts out and put them in our shirt pocket. And then we put about 4 of us did this. Then we put the chili topinos in the rest of the peanuts. And now we're sitting back in the back of the room and he's looking because we're eating peanuts and we're passing the sack around. But what he doesn't notice is that when the sack comes to me, I get the peanuts out of here, put my hand down in the sack, but I don't pick up anything. Pull them out, throw them in my mouth. And the next guy's doing the same thing, and the next guy's doing the same thing. And so he's watching us, and of course we know he's watching us. We're supposed to be studying. We know he's watching, but we think that he doesn't know or we know it. So now he very kind of silently gets up from his seat, and I'm the second row over from the wall, and he goes down the side of the wall, And then he comes around behind me, and I have the sack sitting there on my desk. And he comes and he grabs that sack, and he says, I told you when one eats, we all eat. And I said, well, but I bought those, I paid for those. Well, shouldn't have brought them in here. He walked up to the front and he sat down in his seat behind the desk. And he put his hand down in there, got a handful of those, and he threw them in his mouth. And I'll tell you, he just, tears just started running down his face. And, but he didn't dare say anything because he'd come and got them. I hadn't offered them to him. And so he didn't know that water makes it worse with the chili topino. So he heads out for the drinking fountain, and he gets a drink, and now he really was burning. So he came back in there, and he came back to my desk, and he says, you got me. And so anyway, I felt kind of bad. But another day, I took my shoes off in the class. I'm sitting there with my shoes off. I had socks on. And some of the other students had done this. And he came back and he grabbed my shoe and he threw it out the window. That's a one-story building there that lit on the grass out there. And so I said, no, you need to go get my shoe and bring it back here. No, I said, you're not supposed to take them off the class, you know that. Well, but you didn't tell me that before, so get my, no, I didn't do it. So when the class was over, we went out as a group, and we got my shoe, and then we went over to his car and took the gas cap off. And we went over, and that center section I talked about that the city had in the streets with grass out in there, well, that was true there. We took it out, and it was flooded. It was yay deep in water. And we tossed his gas cap out into there about 6 feet out. And so then he looked out the window and saw us. So he came out there, and he said, get my gas cap out of there. And I said, you didn't get my shoe when you threw it out the window, so why should I get your gas cap? We're all smiling all the time we're doing this. We're not mad. So he goes and gets a yardstick, and he's trying to fish that thing out of there. If it had been me, I'd have just pulled off my shoes and socks and waded out there and got it. He's fishing, and he finally got it out of there. But anyway, and then there were some other things. I don't remember what the others were.
I wouldn't tell.
But the time that school year was over, he said to Jack Wright and I, at least, and maybe the others were with it, he said, I've had it with you Mesa Mormons. He said, you guys are too tough for me. So he said, I've resigned. I'm not going to be teaching here anymore. I've resigned. You've driven me out of town. I said, no, we didn't mean to do that, because we weren't going to be in his class anymore anyway. But Boris and Jack, they were seniors. They were graduating in a week or two, and it was my third year, so I wouldn't be there anymore. But anyway, he left, and I never heard anything from him for a while. And later, you and I ran into him over at ASU years later. I didn't know where he went. He just left here. And so when Kennedy was elected president, I had just started teaching school at Camelback, and Russ Jr. was a senior in high school, I guess. And Brother McMurrin had gone to California, got his master's degree, got a doctorate, and at that time had been vice president of Utah University when the President Kennedy appointed him as U.S. Commissioner of Education.
And didn't you see him on the Tabernacle ground before that?
Well, yeah, I did see, but that was back in '47. So that wasn't too far in the future. But anyway, came. He was invited by ASU to come there and to give a lecture about education around the world, because he'd been to Russia, he'd been a lot of places. So he's standing up there in the Student Union building, and Russ and I are sitting back on about the 10th row and right in the middle. And he's up there talking, and all of a sudden, I'm watching his face, and all of a sudden, I see him zero in on me. Right? He keeps right on talking, but he zeroed in on me. He got this little smile on his face, right like this. And so I knew he'd seen me and he'd recognized me. Now mind you, this is 16 years, 17, 18 years.
Well, but you
After
had
seminary.
seen him on the temple grounds before that.
Well, I
that's-
said I saw him in 1947.
And that's what when he said to you.
Well, I know, but anyway, well, let's throw that in there.
Well, that's
Mom
the part.
and Grandpa Richens and Evelyn and Penny and I went up to conference in 1947, April conference. And we were standing there on the south side of the temple, and it was before the meeting or between meetings or whatever. And I see Sterling McMurran standing there talking to a group of men. There's probably 6 or 7 men there, just on the south side there, 30, 40 feet from the exit on the south side. He's standing there talking to them, or he's listening. I mean, they're all talking to each other. And I walked over there, and I walked up right behind him and stood right behind him. I mean, this far away, right back of him. And these other men kind of zero in on me, because what's this guy doing up there, stands too close to Sterling. And so Sterling senses that they're looking beyond him, and so he turns around to look, and he looks into my face, and he says, "And to think that we would meet on hallowed ground." And so we shook hands, and anyway, that's where I think he told me then that he'd gone to California and got his degree. Well, you can turn that off and we'll give him a goodbye.
And
And you
they all
found
were
it.
probably back.
Okay, so where were
There's
we?
some chips there, Russ, if you'd like some, honey.
Well, since
Oh,
I'm
you
holding,
probably don't like those.
since I'm holding the list, I'll ask the.
I don't think they have cheese on
I'll
them,
ask
but
the ones
maybe-
that I want to hear first.
Okay.
Because we were talking a little bit about, your first meetings with Grandma, and so I wanted to hear the story of your first kiss.
I don't remember.
Just
what
what
you
you
do,
do,
Must have been
Brian
memorable,
kissed
like-
you on the forehead.
He always kissed me on the forehead.
Well, not always. I
Well,
mean, at first.
As a follow-up to his stories about the seminary teacher and the jalapenos
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and that, he has another story about typing class. How he didn't ever learn to type, but he could take the typewriter apart and put it back together. And then he's commented
in the
after he
class
tells,
period.
Well-
after telling those 3 stories, he
Now,
then
that wasn't
says,
my
as a
fault.
counselor, he
That
better
was not my
understands the
fault.
kids who mess around in school.
I know
because-
nothing is ever their
By
fault.
Because that's what he
today's-
did in
By
school,
today's
mess
logic,
around.
that was not my fault. Mr. Porter used to come in, when we'd come into the class, he would take the newspaper and go down the hall to the bathroom and sit down in there and just leave us there in the class. And we were mostly all sophomores.
Spend the whole class
Be down
hour
there reading the
down there and
paper.
reading, doing his business.
Well, if he wasn't gonna be there to see me type, then I wasn't gonna spend my time typing. I was gonna spend my time doing something else. So I learned how to just take the typewriter apart, dismantle it, and put it back together. Except I didn't always put it back together the same way I took it apart.
Rearrange all the keys and.
Well, the keys were all, they'd taken the little caps off of each and turned them over so the
So we
blank
didn't
side
know
showed.
what your fingering,
So
you
you
had to
couldn't
learn.
see, because you're supposed to learn the touch system. Well, whatever typewriter I was on, and these inventors, they just really ruin everything. They made typewriters that had solid tops that had the letter engraved in there, wasn't anything you could do with that. But I would take the cap off, take the paper and turn it over, but I wouldn't put it
In the right.
on the right place. I'd move them all around and then have them all back
We had
together.
different kinds of typewriters, Remingtons and Underwoods,
Yeah.
they were all the same.
So that the next class that came in, whoever sat down there, here were all these letters in the wrong places. Well, Porter finally, he said, now some of you are messing around here, and I'm thinking, not my fault. If you were in here like you're supposed to be, I wouldn't be doing that. Well, that's the way they think today. Nobody takes responsibility for what they do. But anyway, I did that, and when the year ended, why, I could type probably 20 words a minute if I'm watching my fingers, and that was about it. But I knew quite a bit about typewriters. I probably should have gone into that business as a typewriter repairman.
Well, then you'd be out of work because they don't exist anymore.
Yeah, they changed them all, put the letters, just engraved them in there so you know way to switch them.
Well, but they don't even use typewriters anymore.
Well, I could have probably switched those. I probably could have got down in there and disconnected the dealie and
He's saying
switched them around.
he could move the keys around on a computer keyboard just as easy as he could a typewriter.
Oh, well, it's not anymore then.
But then in a cappella choir, I was the president of the a cappella choir, and I can't read music and never could, and that always puzzled me why the teacher let me be the president when I couldn't read music. But Gail Standage, who died here about a year or so ago, and lived right around the corner here from us, that guy's mother was a piano teacher. And so he learned to play the piano when he was a little kid. He went to school with Mom, but he didn't go to school with me and Alma. So I didn't know him really till I got to high school, except that I went down the road past their house.
Before him or after him?
They lived right there on
Yes,
Country
ours.
Club, and I saw him, and I knew who he was, and I knew his dad, Charlie. And anyway, Gail would stand by me, and he would sing the first time through on the song that we were going to learn. First time through, he'd sing every note perfect. And so I'm listening, and that music is coming out of his mouth, going in my ear, and some of it's coming out of my mouth. But by the time we'd gone through that about 3 or 4 times, I could sing it just about as well as I could ever learn it, because hearing him do it and singing beside him, I could pick that up. I picked it up fast. But the problem there was that we'd get bored. You know, we'd know the song within 15 minutes the time we started. And so we would decide that maybe we ought to sing alto for a while. Never learned it, because hearing him do it and singing beside him, I could pick that up. I picked it up fast. But the problem there was that we'd get bored. You know, we'd know the song within 15 minutes the time we started. And so we would decide that maybe we ought to sing alto for a while. And we'd sing alto for a while, and he could do that too, and I could follow him. And then we'd sing soprano for a while, and then maybe tenor for a while. Well, the teacher could hear this back up front, and he knew this was a male voice singing soprano. But anyway, finally one day, he spoke out and he said, "Now I'm tired of this. Whoever you guys are singing soprano, cut it out. Now let's just sing your part and quit doing this." Well, so we kind of slacked off for a minute or two, and we were back at it again. Well, anyway, one day we're standing there, and we're just really enjoying ourselves. We know our part perfectly, so we don't need to be singing it over and over and over. So we decide we'll sing tenor. And so we're singing tenor. Like I say, he's singing it, and I'm listening and imitating it. And all of a sudden, hands grabbed our shoulders like this, turned us around. It was Wheatley, the teacher. We hadn't seen him go around the back. Grabbed us, and he says, "Get out." just get out of this class, I've had it with you. Well, I thought about saying, wait a minute, I'm the president, you can't be the president out. But I didn't, we just laughing. And so it was almost the end of the year. It was right probably 2 weeks before the year was over. And I didn't think we'd done anything that bad. We were learning. We knew our parts, and we were doing it. We were singing tenor or whatever we sang, singing it well. We weren't messing it up.
That time.
But he was mad about it. So he says, I'm giving you both an F for the semester. As we went out in the hall, he said that to us. Well, now, if he'd have given me an F, I wasn't going to graduate. And Gail would have had to take another course over too. So we went down to the office to RBL Taylor, and we went in and we told him what happened. And so he called for Wheatley.
Dundas, you know.
Well, William Dundas Wheatley, but we didn't say anything about that. We just called him Mr. Wheatley. He came down, and so he told Harvey L. what we'd been doing in there. And Harvey L. said, well, you can give him an F. You can give him an F for this term if you want to. But they both have A's for all the rest of the terms. So if you average those grades together, they still will pass the course. They won't flunk because you average them together. Now, I liked that when he said that. I thought that was neat. But they gave us an assignment, something to do that hour for the rest of the semester. But later on, years later, as I thought about that, I thought RBL didn't really support that teacher like he should have. Now, I didn't want an F, but I think he should have supported Wheatley. Because at the end of that year, Wheatley resigned and left and went back east someplace.
And Grandpa's tried over the years
And
to
I
find him, to apologize.
tried for years
never
to
able
find where he went, to Milano's music store and the other teachers that had taught there, to find out where he went when he left here, and I couldn't find anybody that knew until we were up at Tom's and Beverly's, and somebody had sent a letter inviting him to something, and had his address, and he was teaching music back in Alabama somewhere, and he was teaching out at the Air Force. There was an air base there, and he was out there, volunteered his time, I guess. I don't know, maybe they paid him, but he was out there and directed the air base choir, and I'm sure he had some good singers. But that was 10 years before I found it out, when Tom said, well, we knew where he was at such and such a time, but that'd been 10 years earlier, and still wasn't able to reach him. So I guess I'll just have to do it in the spirit world, just apologize to him.
So
Because
what's another story?
he was a good teacher.
Did we get the kissing one?
He wasn't a Mormon, he might have been a Mormon.
That was Bryan's
Treated
question.
him better.
You didn't have a first kiss? Nobody remembered?
Oh, yeah, the first
Well-
one, but I don't.
Well, I'm sure there was a
The
first
first one I got from my boyfriend before, I've written it down and I've got the page I wrote it on.
Just not with Grandpa.
Not with Grandpa.
No, that was so memorable. Well, if you don't have that one, then Bryan
Well,
was...
I just remember that we went together to the dance, and then we went somewhere with Marvin McAllister
Oh,
and
that was
somebody
on,
in the
that was
car.
after Mutual. You can find
And she was sitting on my lap, because there were 6 of us in the car there.
They came to my house
and,
and picked me up.
And then I remember somewhere along the line, I kissed her on the forehead.
Yeah.
She had some bangs, and I put my hands on the side of her face and kissed her on the forehead just before she went in Mass. But I don't
Isn't that
remember.
tender?
Isn't that...
I don't
Isn't
remember the
that-
first kiss,
You fell for him just like that, didn't you?
but I remember the best kiss.
Oh, dear.
We were over to Phoenix to the show, and who were we with?
Kenneth and Shirley
Oh,
Dingle.
Ken, Shirley, well, no, because we had our, were you in
No.
Kenneth's car?
We're in Kenneth.
Okay, now
You
we're
weren't driving.
sitting in the back, well, he couldn't have driven.
I know, what's the,
We were sitting in the back
Well,
seat,
the kiss was so good.
and
so
as we
long.
went out Van Buren Street, why, I planked a kiss on her, and we kept that kiss till
We
we
were
got
coming
clear
home.
out to the castle. where our post office.
and there were stoplights
So
all
that
along
wasn't the
way.
first kiss, was probably the longest. Because we held that kiss from 24th Street and whatever the nut house.
We'll have to
So
edit that one.
figures.
We'll have to edit that one for the great grandchildren. So
But all the way out to Tover's, to the castle,
Well, they didn't have
And then we
16
both
as the
were-
dating, then you could date
where
anytime.
we're
But you were
both about
16
ready
then
to
anyway.
die of asphyxia.
Just before.
We stopped.
Anyway, well, what's next? What
Okay,
next?
from here on out, then, for the great grandkids' sake, we'll just call it not kissing, but CPR.
Well, that's right.
First time you perform CPR on grandma.
Okay, Brian wants to know the proposal when you proposed to Grandma.
Okay.
Well,
I don't think
she
you
proposed to me, actually.
Oh, naturally.
She said one time, she says, you know, why don't we get married? And I said, who'd have us? Anyways, that didn't really happen.
Yes, it
I'm glad
is.
you added that.
You know, this business of kneeling down on your knee and proposing or all that, really, that wasn't that common in those days as they would have you believe. People just went together and they grew together and they loved each other and they just sort of evolved into,
If I hadn't
Getting
married
married.
him, mother would have married him.
He was a popular guy.
Yes,
Yeah,
but
her-
like,
her mother liked me and
Does he
and my
do-
mother liked her.
he'd do work for her that she couldn't get anybody else to do.
Like chop the water pipe
Yes.
into.
She wanted this tamarack tree moved that was right on the neighbor's property, but it was right in her kitchen. And so he was taking that out, and then he thought it was a root, and he chopped the water line, which meant they
Well,
had
it
to
looked
dig
like a road,
clear
all
from the
rusted
street.
down in there, just looked
Call
like the
a
roots.
plumber.
See, the tree had been cut down as just a stump like this. Now they want the stump out of there. So I'm digging. It's right outside the door, kitchen door there on the east side. And you only had about 6 feet or so from the fence to the house. So I'm digging down in there and cutting the roots with the axe as I find them and digging some more. So I figured cut enough of those roots to be able to pull that stump out. Well, here's a nice root about that big around. So I chopped that thing and water comes. So we called the plumber. And the
Line of
plumber
Bushman.
came and there wasn't any way he could fix it because the pipe was too rusty. Everything he would do to it, it just
Crumble.
wouldn't. He'd cut off this piece and try to thread it and it just twist the pipe because it was so thin from rust. Been in there a lot of years. And so finally he just couldn't do anything, so we had to lay a new pipeline from the meter into the house. And your dad wasn't all that thrilled, but then I guess he probably thought, well, I'll probably get this guy as a son-in-law later, so maybe it's worth it. Or maybe he thought that line wasn't gonna last that much longer anyway, so.
Better now than later.
And so when he got through, he pulled the stump out
With the car,
with
with
this
the old
car
Chevy,
and took it clear down to Grandpa and Grandma Mortensen's,
down on Center Street.
where they had a vacant lot and they could chop it up and use it for firewood in their wood stove.
Yeah.
Pulled it with a chain clear down through town.
Yeah, I wonder what they'd say about that today. I pulled that out onto the street in front of her house, and was the center still in out there then, or was it a street all the way
I
across?
don't remember.
But anyway, here I am with this 27 Chevy, and I have a chain on that big old stump about this big around, the big roots sticking out there. And I pull out onto the street, and I'm going down the street west there, clear down the next block.
Center Street.
And then 2 more blocks and then to get to Center Street. So we went about a half mile. And then around the corner, this thing dragging along behind that old Chevy. And pull it up a driveway and into their backyard and disconnect. I thought, what would a policeman say to you today if you went out there, started pulling a stump down the street like that?
One time I had
He'd probably
gone-
write you up 16 citations.
I had gone to the chiropractor, and he came to pick me up, and he was going west, and they had a divider in the street, but every little ways they'd leave a space so you could walk through that without going up to it. And all of a sudden I heard the doctor say, "Look at that crazy fool coming through this opening." And he was, instead of going clear down the corner and turned around, he just turned around in that car in this little bit. Oh, don't do that. In the crosswalk.
Well, if you're gonna tell stories, then we'll have you on video too.
Well, anyway, that's all. Go ahead, what else did you want?
Okay, Grandpa. Let's see. We had, well, the Model T. You told us that story before,
Yeah.
while the video was off. But
that was
the one that you bought.
That was the first car I ever owned, and it was a Model T Ford that had no fenders, and but it did have a starter on it. It didn't have to crank it because much older than that, all the Model Ts had to be cranked. They didn't have starters on them at all. And the bigger cars did. The Buicks and those cars all had starters way back to probably 1910, but the Fords didn't do it till 1922 or somewhere in there. But anyway, these guys that carried paper out with me, Telvin Wellis and Bob Shields and this bunch of guys, had this Model T Ford they wanted to sell. And it ran good, and they'd driven it up there in the middle of the night. And when we picked up the papers real early in the morning, they'd have it there sometimes. And so I said, "How much do you want for it?" It's $10.
$10?
Had pretty fair tires on it, and it ran good. And so I got $10 and bought it from them.
But you were making you were making $3 a day doing the melons.
Yeah, but I was saving some money. I'd been carrying, plus I made some other money.
But you could buy a
working.
car with less than a week's wages.
Yeah, that's right.
Just that car.
Well, I
Holy
bought
cow.
other cars. Tom bought a car for $5, a Model T Ford that ran good.
How much did you pay for the arch?
$35, and I drove that thing for a year and a half and sold it for $35. But anyway, they wanted to sell it, and I had $10, so I paid them. And then I took my bike in the back and went ahead and delivered my papers on home in the car.
How old were you delivering papers?
14. And nobody cared in those days if you had a driver's license or anything else. Nobody even cared. As long as you didn't have a
My
wreck.
aunt never had one. She
and
drove the
trouble.
car all the time. She never had a license.
So I get home with that thing, and I laid my bicycle, well, later in the day I did this. But anyway, I wanted to go up the Lehigh Hill over there, now not on the road. West of the golf course, west of the old power plant, the clubhouse, which is on the hill over here, there was just a trail where vehicles had been up it, but it was just a rocky, and just went like this up a wash, just went up a wash up to the top of the hill, and the loose rocks and stuff on there. And so I was going to drive up there, and those old cars, these guys sit way high up off the ground. You weren't dragging in the middle like you are in cars now. And so I start up that hill, and it goes up there about 50 feet or maybe even 100 feet, and it just dies. So I rolled back down the hill, and I started again. Drive up there, same place, it dies again. So I knew what's happening. The gas tank is under the seat. So when you've got the car going this way, and there was no fuel pump on those cars.
Gravity
It was just
feed.
gravity feed. If you're tipped up like this, the gas tank's lower than the carburetor, so you're not going to get gas up there. And I realized that after the second try, so I just turned it around, backed up the thing, and now the carburetor's lower and you get gas. Backed up the top, drove around. Well, now I get back home, and I put my bike down there, just laid it down the driveway somewhere there, and forgot about it. and got in the car and backed over one of the wheels, really messed the wheel up. Now, this was on a Saturday, so I put the bike in the back of the Model T. Now, like I say, there's no top on it, no fenders, just looked like a bathtub. And backed out, took it up to Monrad's, and he fixed the wheel, fixed it all up, so it's okay. Now I go back home. Now I go back to town and I pick up Lawrence Horn probably and Lynn Stewart that we see over at the temple all the time, and Floyd Dane, I don't know who, I sat some of those guys in there. And it's Saturday night now and it's after dark, but it had headlights. We're driving up and down the street. So we're cruising Main Street right through the middle of town.
In a Model T Ford with no
Model
fenders and no bumpers and
had license plates on it, but anyway, I go up the street, turn around, then sometimes I'd turn through the crosswalks, because down the center of the streets, the light poles are still that way here in town. There's light poles right down the center of the street. And every so often, you had a crosswalk going across there, and they had a ridge, like a border, running the length of just all the way down the street there. And they just cut out a section of that for a crosswalk for people to walk across the street. Well, it was about this wide or so. So I just turn and go through that, and turn and go back down the other way. And it was funny, and people laughed, and police never said anything if they saw it. So we were cruising up and down there for about an hour, just having the time of our lives, and these guys were sitting up on the back with their feet on the seat in the back, sitting up on the back of the body. And all of a sudden, red light comes on, and I hear a little siren. So I pull into a parking place there by Pierce's, Johnson Pierce Company. A policeman gets out and he says, "Do you have the title and registration for this car?" And I said, "No, I don't. I just bought it yesterday." I said, "I haven't got it yet." And he said, "Who'd you buy it from?" And I said, "Well, Tillman Willis," and I named him the guys. And he said, "Well, you're not going to get a title for this car because they don't have a title for this car." He said, "They assembled this car out of a whole bunch of pieces and they can't get a title for it. They won't give them a title because it's not the original parts in the car." And so he said, "Would you just follow me over to the police station?" And I said, "Okay." Now I thought, maybe I'll try to outrun him. So I'm sure he had a much newer car than that 25 Model T.
Yeah, not much newer.
Well, but could you turn
This is-
around and go across? That's your escape route
could
right
get
there.
away from him.
Get
And
away
he
from the
couldn't have
cross.
turned through there.
And in those days, though, they'd shoot you for running. So
Police blimp.
Yeah.
I followed him over to the station, and so he had me give him the keys and went inside, and Joe Meyer was in there, and Joe said, "Well, Russ or Harris," he probably called me Harris, said that they don't have a title for that car and they can't get one. Said, "We've been chasing these guys. Every time we get close to them, they go into somebody's driveway or yard, and then we can't go in there and get them. You have to catch them out on the streets." And so he said, "You just better go back and get your money back from those guys." Nice. They were real polite about this. They weren't being sarcastic or rude in any way. Just real nice about it. Nobody said, "Where's your driver's license? I'm 14 years old." No, nothing.
Well, did they even have an age limit? Or,
Well, there was an age limit. Yeah, you had to be 16 to get
So
a
even
driver's license.
back then, you had to-
even then.
But nobody cared.
But you
obviously.
got your driver's license for life.
Yeah.
I still have my old driver's license that issued to me that's for life.
Yeah.
Now, this is clear back, but by 1948 or somewhere in there, 49, they decided they could make some money by renewing these licenses instead of giving them to you for life. And so they changed the law so that now you have to go back and renew your driver's license every so often.
Well, now they changed it again. They're good till you're 65. My license is good till 2038.
Is that right? Yeah.
So
Well, that's right, but you paid, well, you paid more than
$25.
$4, yeah.
$25.
Yeah, so you had to pay for every one of those years. And, so anyway, it was a way to make money, and so they did it, so.
But he lost his car.
I still have that old license, but in the scrapbook somewhere.
So you
But anyway, that
took
was
the car back to them and,
well, the police said,
or the police?
policeman said, we'll just keep the car here, and when they come to get it, we'll follow them home and make it clear to them that they better not ever be out on the street with it again. They better either figure out a way to get a title, or they better dismantle it like they found it. And so they gave me back my $10.
You got your money back.
So there wasn't a problem.
all $10.
But then wasn't, well, it was a year after that, I guess. A year later, when I went, saw this ad in the paper for this 27 Chevy in Phoenix for $35. And so I went down to Sam Cohen, who had a store there on Main Street, and he loaned money, but he also a pawn shop kind of thing, and I don't know, he sold some things out there, whatever it
That
was.
was number in there.
But I went into Sam and I said, I need $35 to buy a car, and I need to borrow it. He said, I'll pay it back. And well, I don't know that Sam knew me, but Mesa was so small, he'd probably seen me around. And he said, well, who's your dad? And I said, my dad's Roy Harris. And he said, okay, and when do you need the money? And I said, well, just quick as I can get it, because I need to go over there and get the car before somebody else buys it. And so he said, okay. So he gave me these papers, wrote a few things on there, and then gave me the papers, gave me the $35, and said, now have your dad sign this and bring it back into me tomorrow. And gave me the money. For my dad hadn't even signed anything yet. Now that's how trusting people were back in those days. And so I took the money, went on over to Phoenix, bought the car, drove it back home. Dad signed the papers. I took them in and gave them back to him. But that, right after that's when I started working at Sackatown. And
How old were you by this time?
well, I was 16, but I went and I made enough money in 1 week. Well, I was making $110, $120 a week while I was working at Sackatown. You had a lot of people who weren't even making that much a month. And they were us kids, Tom, a year and a half older. We're out there working. Not even 17 yet. Took the exam with the Carpenters Union and became a journeyman carpenter. I worked 1 week as an apprentice carpenter out there. And Tom worked 1 week as a second-year apprentice. And then we told the foreman, we can lay that flooring faster and better than those guys are doing it. Because these were men, some of them 30, 40 years old, 50. And we can do a better job than they're doing. And he says, what makes you think so? And we said, because our dad brought us up to be carpenters and taught us, and we can do it. And so he said, well, I'll tell you what. You come back here next week with a journeyman card, because floor layers got paid foreman's wages. They got 2 bits an hour more than carpenters got. He said, you bring back a journeyman card, and I'll work you for a week, and if you're as good as those guys, then I'll put you on as floor layers. So we said, fair enough. So that weekend, we went to the Carpenters Union, took their test. They gave us each journeyman cards. No more apprentice required. We went back to the job Monday morning. He put us, said, okay. Then we got our tools. Incidentally, he said, bring the tools you're going to need. We got them, had them. We went to work, Tom and I. We could lay a floor and a half a day, which those buildings were probably more than 100 feet long and 20 feet wide. And we could lay all the flooring in that building and half of another one. While the other guys were barely getting one laid, Tom and I could do 1.5 of them. And so, boy, he didn't even wait till the week was over. He came over and saw what we were doing, and he said, I'm turning you in for regular floor layers wages, and I can get it that they started by Monday. So I said, is that satisfactory? And we said, sure. And so the next week, we just, well, we worked together for about probably 2 or 3 weeks, Tom and I did. And then I think they got the notion that if we pair these 2 guys up with 2 other guys, we'll get more work done. So that's what they did. Well, so they put me with the guy, and I said, well, we were doing 4.5 a day, my brother and I. I'd like to keep doing that, so we did. And so did the one Tom was paired up with, so now they're getting it done even faster. And then they put me with a different guy. So I was teaching each one of these guys, and Tom was teaching each one how to do more. And so anyway, we worked right up till all the floors in those 3 camps were laid. And then the foreman said, well, since you worked a week for apprentice wages, I'm going to put you up putting on sheathing, because the floors were all finished for the whole project. Put you on sheathing, but I'm still going to pay you the $1.50 an hour. And they had apprentices up there putting that sheathing on that they were paying 75 cents and 90 cents an hour. So we worked a week on that. Then we just went to regular carpenter work. We're just paid the regular pay, $1.25 now. But Tom would never work on Sunday. And that first week when we were there, they said, okay, now, well, maybe the first week we were laying floor. They said, we got to work this Sunday. We're working 6 days a week, 9.5 hours a day. Now they said, you're going to have to work Sunday also. Tom said to the foreman, I don't work on Sunday. That's the Lord's day. And the foreman said, well, if you don't, they'll fire you. I can't do anything about that. They'll fire you if you don't show up here. And Tom said, well, I hope they don't, but I won't be here. I don't work on the Lord's day. And so we went home, and I'm thinking, now what am I going to do? Now my dad was a government inspector on that job. And so he said, well, I'm going to work on Sunday. And so I thought, and I said, well, I'll go with you. So I went on out there and worked Sunday. Tom didn't. When we went back to work Monday, not a word was said to him by anybody. We just went right on working. And the week or 2 after that, they said, have to work Sunday again. Tom said, not me. And so I worked that next Sunday too. So did my dad. But then I don't remember that we had many more Sundays that we did work. But Tom never worked a Sunday. And I think when they finished that old project, and we had 4,000 men working on that at the height of it, I think when they finished that, I think Tom went out and shut the gate and put the padlock on it. I think he was the last guy that they let off that job. Now, Tom was a good carpenter. Even then, he was good. But they just never said a word to him, but kept him right up till they were fired, well, not fired, but just let him go because he wasn't the work to do. Or 3,999 guys before they got to him.
Didn't you have a lot of those guys start to be inducted into the armed services?
A lot of them that
have been working out there, were getting notices to report for
Getting
military
drafted.
duty.
Well, I didn't have any knowledge of that. I didn't work with anybody who got a notice to report.
What's next? Hurry this along.
Well, what actually encouraged you to join the Navy? Because I know it was shortly after this time, right? Because you were what,
Yeah.
16, 17,
Well, a year
18?
later, yeah.
Okay. So what motivated you to join the Navy?
Well, my dad had always said, And I mean,
Sorry if
many
I'm taking
times,
cuts.
That's all.
Dad had said many times, if you ever have to go in the service, go in the Navy, don't go in the Army. Said, you sleep out in a mud hole, your food's crummy. He said, in the Navy, they have a bunk to sleep in, you get good meals. Said, go to the Navy. Now, I remember him saying that. Well, not saying that that convinced me, but that was always in the back of my mind, that my dad had said that many times. Because he was in World War I, in the trenches over there in France, in the mud. And he saw the Navy guys as they went over and back, nice clean clothes, eating regularly, everything, so he said that. But I guess I had this idea that I was going to go in the Air Force. Roy, my brother Roy, was already in the Air Force. I had gotten my patriarchal blessing when I was 15, 16, somewhere in there. And it said, if we become involved in the war and you have to go to war, you will not be harmed. That there's work for you to do here on the earth and you won't be harmed.
Very short blessing, though.
Yeah. And I looked at that, and so I did something that nobody ought to do, and I learned better. I said, well, if I have that kind of a guarantee, well, then I'm going to go in the Air Force. And I said, and when I see a squadron of German planes, I'm just going after them. Because whatever happens, they're not going to kill me, so, and maybe I'll shoot down some of them. Well, that's arrogance, and Father in Heaven doesn't appreciate that kind of arrogance. And I cleared that up in my mind. But then, Palmer Amundsen, who was Roy's age, went through high school with Roy. Palmer had gone to the Navy as soon as he got out of high school and graduated in 38, I guess it was, when he graduated in high school. He joined the Navy. And he'd gone in the submarine service. In 38, I guess it was, when he graduated in high school. He joined the Navy. And he'd gone in the submarine service. And so here we are, I'm still a senior in high school, and he's back home on leave, and the war's been on about a year, a little over a year, and here he is. They invite him to come up to the high school at Mesa High and talk to us in an assembly. And so that we had assemblies every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And they had different kinds of programs and that. We had Tom Harmon there one time, and he was All-American football player. We had several different, well, Gene Autry came and talked to us in assembly. In fact, I even took the old Chevy and went to Phoenix to the Adams Hotel, picked up Gene Autry, brought him back to Mesa for the assembly. They'd ask me, said, you have a car, don't you? And I said, well, yeah, I have a car. Okay, well, Gene Autry needs to get over here from the Adams Hotel, so will you go over there and get him? This was right during school time. Well, okay, so I did. Got me back in that arch. But anyway, Palmer Amundsen spoke to us in the assembly, and he said, was telling us about the submarine service and how it paid extra, the food was better than the Navy as a whole, and some exciting things, experiences he'd had with it. And I said, that's for me. That right then, I made up my mind, that's for me. Heck with the Air Force. And so from then on, I finished the year. I had to register for the draft when I turned 18. I went over to Jimmy Lindsay, who has Lindsay Guerrero signs here out by Corey's Buick. And Jimmy was a recruiter for the Navy, and they had their office up in the Herd building there, right in the middle of town.
Didn't you get notice that you were going to be drafted?
Well, not yet, I hadn't.
Or you had somebody that told you, didn't you?
I just registered, but then I hadn't heard from anybody. But I went over there and talked to Jimmy, and I said, I want to go in the Navy, and I want to go to submarines, but I don't want to go right now. I want to wait a little while. And he said, well, I couldn't take you right now if you did want to go. He said, there are more volunteers than we can handle. He said, here's what I want you to do. Now, he knew Dad, my dad. He probably knew my older brother Roy. So when I told him I was Harris, well, he knew the family.
And
so-
Roy was in the Air Force.
Roy was in the Air Force by that time. And Joe was in the Army back in, well, he was down in Panama by that time, getting ready to go for the jungle fighting in New Guinea and that. Anyway, so he said to me, I can't take you now anyway, but wait, and when you get your draft notice to report, why, you go ahead and take the physical, and then when they get through, they will likely ask for some volunteers for the Marine Corps and for the Navy. And you just volunteer, but whether you do or not, and he gave me one of these cards, and he wrote right on there, report to the Navy. And so anyway, I had that card with me, and I got the physical, and it's a 2-day deal. Came back, Russ was born that night that I went and got the first physical. He was born that night. The next day.
I had come to Mesa to stay with Cleon, because you had your physical over here, didn't you?
I had the physical in Phoenix.
Oh. Anyway,
In
she
the
had brought me over
Force
here.
Tower.
I stayed, and then I started labor that night, and so she had to drive me back to Phoenix.
And I was working in a machine shop.
Yeah.
And they pulled up, I'm working the midnight shift, or night shift, I guess it was. And they pulled up out front, and there was hardly any cars, because during the war, you just didn't have much traffic.
But we'd gone down to get Grandma Harris, and we had to bring Grandma Harris's car because Cleon's car didn't have that much gas in it, because we were on rations.
Yeah.
So they drove over in the LaSalle over
Yeah,
there.
there were only about 3 or 4 of us on that night shift there, and about 25 people in the daytime. We were making socket wrenches, and then we began to make some sockets too. But what they did to keep people from stealing the socket sets was they had one of the shops making wrenches and another shop somewhere else making the sockets. Well, you might steal one wrench, but what good is it to you? You don't have any sockets that'll fit it. So they didn't have a problem with parts. But then, towards the end there, they started making sockets, but we only made one, just one size.
You want that look?
And that was an interesting experience doing that, because we had a guy that was a pattern maker and worked for the automobile industry, making the tools that were needed to do various kinds of work. And so what we had there was that they'd turn, the lathe guys would turn this socket, and the one they made is only about bigger as my little finger. They'd turn this thing out, drill the holes in it, through it, and then so it was less like a little piece of pipe. And then those came in baskets. They'd come and dump them, or set the basket there by my machine. I'm sitting in front of a furnace that just turns around, and there's just one opening in it, and the inside is turning. And so I'm sitting there in front of that furnace with a machine here that has a trip on it, the foot, and I'm picking up one of these that that's in the basket, and put it, just a wire, just a piece of wire with a hook on it like that. And I put it in there and set it down in that furnace. It's going to go around, and take out one that's already been around the circle. And when I take out, I'd stick into this hole in the machine here, and I'd kick the lever, and it would come down and punch the square that the wrench is going to fit into. And then, as it pulled back up, it pulled it off, and a gust of air hit it and blew it over here into a box, or barrel. And so it cooled it a little bit as that air hit it, and blew it over into that barrel. Now, that's all I'm doing, just sitting there, putting one in, taking one out, tramping on it. Well, then, every so often, they'd bring back, and the guy would come and change the tool in there to do the other side of the socket. Now you're going to put the side in that goes on the nut. And he puts that tool in there. Now we're still doing the same thing. We're setting it in there when it comes around, I'm sitting in the machine, tripping it, it's punching it, pulling up, blowing it off in the barrel, but now you have the square in one end for the wrench and the socket in the other end as the thing to fit on the bolt. And so it was rather simple, but it wasn't that simple to invent the machines and everything that did it. Well, anyway, that's what I was doing when they pulled up out in front and said, they're taking Mom to the hospital. Did I follow you down there right then? Did I quit and follow you, or did I come down when I got off
Should
work?
I remember that? I don't know.
I think it was midnight or some 1 o'clock in the morning or something by the time you got there.
Yeah, it was.
And so I was gonna get off work at 7 or something like that. I may have just waited and gone there at that time.
And one of the nurses,
Anything
Cleona,
else I could do.
and Grandma took me in, and they'd already taken me up, and so one of the nurses came back and saw Cleona and Grandma there, and Cleona was expecting.
Yeah,
She said, haven't they taken you up yet?
He was born not long after that.
And he was born 1 week to the day
Yeah.
after Russ Jr. And that's the day that Grandpa went to the service.
Yeah. Well, so here I'd been for my physical that day, part of it. Then I was to work in the night, and then I got off, went to the hospital, make sure she was all right, and then went back to the draft board for the second day, and they, whatever else they did, checked eyes and whatever, and then they said, we need some volunteers for the Marine Corps. They didn't ask for anybody for the Navy. Said we need volunteers for the Marine Corps. Well, some guys volunteered. I didn't say anything, and the CC said the rest of you go to the Army. Well, then I walked over and I handed him this card that Jimmy Lindsay had given me at the Naval Recruiting. And I said, he said for me to give this to you, that I was to report to the Herd Building, because it was about 3 blocks north of where we took the physical, in the Lures buildings where we got the physical. And so he said, okay. And so he hands me all my papers, all the records, everything he had on me, just hands them to me in a folder. He said, good luck. Well, I could have gone home and nobody would have known the difference. Their records would have shown that I went to the Navy. The Navy's records wouldn't have shown anything because I hadn't reported to them. I could have gone, stayed out of the war, but I wasn't going to do that. Anyway, I went on down the street.
Not with a guarantee like the one you had.
That's right. That's right.
You had a war to win.
I got there and Jimmy said, okay, you'll leave a week from today. I said, well, my wife had a baby last night. Can't you make that 2 or 3 weeks? And he said, I'm lucky I can make it 1 week. He said, no, it'll have to be a week. So I said, okay, that's the best I can do.
So we blessed Russ Jr. Grandpa Harris and Grandpa Richens were over, and Daddy blessed Russ Jr. there in the bedroom before he left that night.
They were supposed to stay in the hospital 10 days. They kept mothers in the hospital 10 days those times. But we told them that she needed to come home because I needed to go off to the war and go to San Diego for boot camp. So they said she was okay to release, they released her. And so we took her to Evelyn's house. Aunt Evelyn's house was just a block from the hospital. And George, well, George was still
Hunting.
there. He
No,
saw
he was
hunting.
hunting.
I mean, but he didn't go to the Navy for quite a while after that.
Drink some water.
And George,
Oh, do you have some there?
so we took her home, and then I had to catch the train at 9 o'clock for San Diego. And went over that strange route. I wished it had been daylight and I could have seen it. And so Grandpa's, my dad and Grandpa Richens and I named Russ, blessed him and named him, which I did, because I was an elder. And then they took me down to the depot, got on that train. Boy, that was a tough way to go. I just thought, it's got to be a better way than this, but I wasn't going to mess it up.
All you had to do was burn your papers.
That's all I would have to do, that's right.
Okay, what's the next story? Let's hustle this along.
Oh, we've got hours and hours more.
I was gonna say,
Well, here's,
Is this
this might be a week or so project.
Yeah, how much more we got on this tape?
Susan
Yeah.
had a,
Oh, for the tape or for the?
Well, because you want a full tape for this war, not just the end of a tape.
Well, it'll all
Whenever
be
you do
joined
the
together
war,
in
I'll
the
go
end anyway.
shopping
That's
somewhere.
voice maybe.
well, to eat up some tape, tell the story of the bad suit. It's the joke,
Oh.
the joke that you and Tom would tell all the
But
time.
he can't do that anymore, the
Oh.
suit.
You have to act it out, and I
Well, they
can't.
want him
Oh,
to
yeah,
do it.
oh, I didn't, okay.
Well, he can't bend his head.
One of you guys could do this, and you ought to be doing it for the family.
Yeah, he's gotta teach
Tom
it.
learned this years and years ago when he was bishop over here in Mesa, clear back probably 1956 or
I need
5
something
or
for my
something.
talk tomorrow, maybe I'll.
And the story is you have to act it out. The bishop has a counselor who's kind of a
Well, let's
tacky
go get a
dresser.
coat and put on
All
Richard.
right.
He can do it.
Well, if one of you want to
I
stand up
didn't
and do
mean to
this.
say that, I didn't know
Oh,
you
no,
couldn't
but
do it
he-
anymore.
Well,
gotta
we
teach.
can guide you through it.
oldest grandchild.
Because really,
He's gotta teach somebody.
It was about as funny as, I don't know his name, but I reckon, but he has, his face rings a bell.
Ah, yeah.
That's,
All right, well, my favorite grandpappy joke, I don't remember, I was probably, I don't know, maybe 9 or 10 years old. Grandpa would come over and Grandma would come over every time us kids had a birthday, and we
Ball
would,
game.
Grandpa would race us kids for our birthday, and
you're
we,
supposed to forget that
well,
story.
it would take us till we were 12 or 13 before we could finally beat him, or that he would let us beat him. Anyway, and I remember after a race, he told me a joke, and it's the best grandpappy joke. What did one fly say to the other fly? Your man is open. And that's my favorite grandpappy joke.
I
Okay,
thought you
That's a
were
great
gonna tell
joke.
that other part.
Oh, no, that's just between you and me, that
Well,
one,
Rand-
when I was 13
Rand
years
was
old.
there and
That's right, he
heard
was
that.
holding the tape.
Okay, so you put this coat on.
All right, you narrate and I'll act the story.
Yeah.
So now the bishop says to these counselor, you know, you really need to get
Oh,
some
maybe that won't fit
different clothes. You know, your suit is kind of worn out, and you're up in front of the members of the ward, and you really need to look a little better. So why don't you go down to OPO, which used to be where you could get a suit for $18. Go down to OPO and get you a new suit, or maybe he said Sears or Ward's, but anyway.
One of them. it
So the
doesn't matter.
guy goes down to get the suit during the week. Now, when he comes back to church the next Sunday, why the bishop says, well, hey, that looks pretty good, but he said, notice that this one sleeve is quite a bit shorter than the other one. He says, you need to go back to the suit store and get him to fix this. So we said, okay. So now he goes back to the store. So he points it out, and the guy says, well, here, this is easy. He said, just hold this down, grip this with your hand, and hold it down like that. And after a few days, why, it'll be stretched, and then it'll be just right. But keep a hold of that. And then so he's holding on to it, but it doesn't stretch, so he's keep doing it. The bishop sees him again, and he says, well, he said, now this shoulder here, he said, this is kind of off here on the shoulder. He said, did you point that out to the suit man? He said, no. And said, so he goes back, and the guy said, oh, that's easy. He said, just pull it up like this and put your chin against it and hold it just like that. And he said, that'll pull it into place. Now, so he comes back, and the bishop looks, he says, well, okay, but now one leg of your suit here is longer than the other one. He said, go back there and have him fix that. So he goes back, and the guy just says, well, pull it up like this, and just put your other leg over tight against it, and that'll hold it into place. And he says, okay, so now he comes out of the shop where he bought the suit, and he's walking down the street, and these two guys pass him, and one of them says, look at that poor man. Said, isn't that too bad? And the other one says, yeah, but he sure has on a nice suit.
Nothing like a good old-fashioned grandpa joke.
That's right. Well, I think it was in Parowan that year that
Yeah.
he and Tom told that joke together.
Yeah,
And it's a long time since I laughed that hard.
they got to laughing and it was hard for them to keep up, yeah. Now your coat's in the picture, Dad.
Now what are we?
Well, that's all right.
Well, we have.
We don't have a whole lot of tape left, but we
I
got
think
some.
Where are
there's two
we?
requests real quick.
Thank you.
I think there are VW Racing coming from Mexico.
Oh dear.
That's a
What's
little
that
later.
now?
That's later.
Yeah,
When
that-
you,
Racing the VW coming from Mexico.
we're gonna lose the
Well,
tape.
yeah, that might have been-
Mexico.
Yeah.
When you had that gun, is that what you're talking about? Or another time?
No, when you raced the VW and it blew its engine.
engine.
Oh, well, when I was with Russ and,
Yes,
it was
and
Russ and
Richard.
Julie.
And
And
Richard.
Richard was just a little baby.
When we
Well,
went down
you
to
were
see
about
Kenneth.
a year and a half
Yeah.
old.
Well, I remember sitting on your lap, I think, when driving.
You,
I remember the hotel.
I was
going across
driving.
Well,
Did you drive
I
any
was
of
sitting
that
on
way,
Dad's
or did
lap.
I
You
drive?
probably drove most of
We
the way.
were in the,
going into a
up in the
hotel room
Plymouth
getting
Fury,
hot chocolate
we just bought
in the
that
morning.
Plymouth Fury.
You picked me up at
Well,
1:05 and we went.
Oh, so what happened there, we were coming back from Chihuahua, where we'd gone down to see Kenneth on his mission. And we let him drive from Delicias into Chihuahua, and boy, he thought he was in some high-powered vehicle, and he was. Because that was a 440 horsepower engine in that car. Zoom. I mean, the speedometer went up to 140 miles an hour. And it would have gone that fast too. But anyway, we're coming back, and we're coming out of Superior, and there's a line there, because it's just a 2-lane highway coming down there from Superior. And here's this lineup of cars. And right in front of us, or somewhere near front of us, maybe it was up a car or two, was this Volkswagen with these two hippie-looking guys in it. And so I look ahead, and I know how much power my car has, so I know how fast I can get around. Or think I did anyway, and I did. Look, and so I see a brake up there, 3 or 4 cars ahead, and so I just burn it, and when you push that thing all the way to the floor, it sounded like a jet engine. It had 4 carburetor, 4-barrel carburetor. And normal driving, you'd only were on 2 of them or something like that. But when you kicked that thing to the floor, all 4 of those barrels kicked in. And so anyway, I stepped on that thing and zoomed around and into place. Wasn't a hazard. But it made these 2 guys in the Volkswagen mad. They were really mad because I'd gone up in the line, so they're just staying back there. So we're going on down the highway, and these guys come along and they pass us, because we're going, not trying to race. They pass us and give us the finger. And
That's what did it.
so I said, well, now that was pretty rude. Russ and I were sitting in the front. You guys were in the back. I said, that's pretty rude. I said, we're just gonna have to teach this guy a lesson.
I'm gonna deal with you the same way I used to deal with dogs on my paper route.
So we stepped on it. I said, now watch this. And so I stepped on it, and I got up just almost even with them, and I could have run fast and easy. But I just pulled up, and so they see me, and so they go faster, and I go a little faster, and they go faster. And I'm deliberately letting them stay in front of me, but I want them to think that any minute I'm gonna pass. Faster, faster, faster. We get up to about 75 or so, and all of a sudden, out of the back of that Volkswagen comes this big cloud of smoke. And they pull it over to the side of the road, and they've blown the engine. That's what they've done. And we just waved at them and went on down the road.
With all your fingers.
But Russ didn't think that was nice, and
I didn't either.
I said, well, I didn't do anything to them. They did that to themselves, I didn't do anything to them.
Richard wanted to know if that was the 3 Nephites story. I said, well, that was the trick.
Oh, that's the one, yeah. 3 Nephites, we saw them, didn't we? We were coming out of
I didn't see 'em till
Chihuahua,
they came over there.
coming out of Chihuahua, heading for Juarez. And there's a place halfway between called Sueco, but it's only a service station and maybe a little restaurant's all it is there. But that's where one of the roads goes up to the mountains, up to the colonies. You can cut on Sueco and go up to the colonies, the west side. But anyway, we're halfway between the Chihuahua and Sueco. And all of a sudden our fan belt breaks. Well, now
This
that
is the
car
same
had
trip.
about 4
Yeah,
fan
same-
belts
same
on it.
trip.
But one of them operated the water pump and whatever, so that we knew we couldn't go very far without that belt. We could probably get by without one of the others, but not that one. And so we stopped, and there's nothing we can do. We're sitting there by the road.
But you were gonna send Russ on the bus when
So
it
I
came
said to
by.
Russ, well, these buses have been going by. The only thing we can do is for you to get on one of these buses and go back to Chihuahua and find a belt and come back, and then we'll go on. And he said, well, then he said they have something about these cars that cruise the highway, carry gasoline. I said, well, okay, we haven't seen one of them though, since we left Chihuahua,
Right.
what? No, Juarez left.
Swaker?
Well,
Delicious.
I don't know when we'd even seen one anytime we're in Mexico, but we knew that they had them. So anyway, we're about ready to decide that's the only way to do it, is for him to catch a bus and ride back. And about that time, we look and here over in this field, I mean, right out there in the desert, nobody anywhere around. Here's a pickup truck sitting over there, and we can see a couple of men over there by it. They go, what in the world are those guys doing out here, this forsaken land? So we walked over there, and when we got over to them, Russ proceeds to tell them that we'd broken a fan belt, only he knew a belt, and he wasn't quite sure about fan, and he was having a little trouble telling them that the way they'd understand that it was a fan belt on the car. Belt they knew, but anyway, they finally caught on, or maybe they even lifted the hood and we showed them, pointed to